Please give it up for Aparna Nancherla.
Okay, so just to start, how many people in here can drive? I know it's not.
Yeah!
Cool. And out of those, how many of you consider yourself good drivers? Does anyone consider themselves a bad driver?
Yeah!
Oh, yeah! Cool. Usually no one owns it. I don't know. I don't consider myself sometimes a bad. That's fair. Sometimes we're all bad at things. I don't consider myself a terrible driver, but I'm not sure. Like, I feel like driving is one of those things where you don't really know how you come across to other people. It's like your voice on tape, or like your face, you don't know how other people see it. But I asked a friend to describe my driving style once, and he was like, overly cautious, like to the point where other people in the car start yelling at you out of frustration and anger. And I was like, okay, that's fair. We may have driven together a few times. But to be fair, like, I never wanted to learn how to drive. Like, it was one of those things, like, a lot of teenagers are like, give me that license. But I was like, keep it away from me. Like, I didn't want to learn to drive ALAP, which is as long as possible. Because it just felt too scary to me, like too much responsibility, like just being in charge of like thousands of pounds of metal and like the safety of yourself and others in the direct vicinity. I was like, who needs that kind of responsibility, Like momentum plus or mass times acceleration equals fear. That's what driving felt like to me. So I tried to hold it off as long as possible until finally my parents just got sick of giving me rides, and my dad was like, "You're learning." So one day, like a spring day, beautiful spring day in our suburban Virginia neighborhood, my dad took me on a lesson, and by lesson I mean he just yelled at me while we did loops around the local high school parking lot. And, it went pretty well. Like, I made a couple loops, and then he yelled, "We're driving home!" And I was like, okay, this is a bad idea. And it wasn't that challenging. Like, the main thing that I had to tackle was an unprotected left turn across, like, opposing traffic. Yeah, the hardest turn, no big deal. And one sign you know that like something's not going to go well is if your dad's yelling at you before you start it, your hands are shaking, you've never done it before, like you've just learned to drive straight, and then someone's like, let's do angles, And we started turning, and then at that point my body just went into flight or flight mode, and it was just like, you know what? Forget the turn. Let's go to your happy place. So I just closed my eyes and drove straight across all the lanes, through my neighbor's fence and into their rose garden. At which point my dad, points for consistency, kept yelling. I decided I was done with the situation and just got out of the vehicle without even putting it in park. I was like, let's end this now. And, that was like the first sign to me that I was like, maybe you're not meant to be behind a vehicle, like moving or otherwise. And, like most adolescent trauma, I got through it. Like, I eventually paid for my neighbor's fence. I made them cookies. They weren't even that good cookies. I still feel bad about that. If you're gonna make someone apology cookies, they should be good. Like, otherwise it's just like, what are you doing? But I eventually learned to drive. I only took lessons from there on out from an actual driving school. I believe it was Rudy's driving school. And Rudy was also a yeller, but he was like a surely level-headed Jamaican man, and somehow the accent made it more charming. So I learned to drive, and my record was fine from there on out. Like, the fence was like a one-time incident, and then it was like, smooth sailing. And then cut to 10 years later, it's like also a spring day, weird coincidence, good storytelling. It was like early evening. I was on my way to do a stand-up comedy show, and I was running late. I'm always running late. And I reached my old nemesis, an unprotected left turn. And this was like at a traffic intersection, and the light was turning yellow, but the cars in the other lane were slowing down. So I was like, I have time to make it through. So I start turning, and then a motorcycle starts like coming out of nowhere from the other lane. And I'm like, oh, this wasn't part of the simulation. But at that point, it's too late. I'm already turning, the motorcycle's coming. I just like freak out, but in my credit, I don't close my eyes. And then in like super slow motion, my car is like slowly turning, clips the side of the motorcycle goes spinning in one direction, the driver flies off in another direction, exactly the way human beings should not travel. He bounces on the ground a few times and then just lays there like a nightmare. And then for like a few seconds, like longest seconds of my life up until then, he just lays there, and then he suddenly jumps up like a reanimated Jack in the Box, whips his helmet off, and is just like, "Are you kidding me? I just got this back from the shop." Which, like, I have never been more relieved to see someone jump up and just start yelling. And like at that moment, like I couldn't think. Like you always imagine like, you know, all these situations that could happen to you when you drive, and then like when it actually happens to you, you don't know what's happening. And like first I called 911 on my cell phone, and apparently someone had already called, and then I got out of the car. The guy was like pacing around, but he was kind of out of it, and I was glad because I didn't really know what to say to him because I'm bad at small talk anyway. And then when you almost murder someone, it's like that gives another layer of challenging. And then like some pedestrians came over and they like made sure we were both okay. They made us all sit down. And the weird thing is, like, at this point, I just started crying. Like, sometimes you're just, like, I didn't feel like crying, like, I just started crying. I was so out of touch with my emotions. I was just like, that happened, and then my body was like, and now this happens. And like, eventually an ambulance took away the guy, and then a cop came over and started asking me, like, what happened. And the weirdest thing was, everyone else seemed to be taking the situation great. Like, a couple people were taking photos. The cop was like, why are you so upset? You never hit anyone before? And I was like, no. Like, I texted the guy whose comedy show I was gonna do, and I told him I wouldn't make it because I was in an accident. He didn't even, like, he was like, okay, thanks for the heads up. Like, every week people are just like, I'm dying, not gonna make it. He took it really well. And so that happened, and I was okay, but like I was really shaken up by it, and I feel like over the next few weeks and months, like I couldn't drop the fact that I almost killed a person. Like that had almost happened to me, and that was like a new thing. I had to be like, you're a person who almost killed another person. And like that doesn't go on a dating profile, but it is something you think about a lot. And I think like it was something I couldn't let go of in the following weeks, and finally it like got to a point where I just kept telling all my friends that I knew about. Like it's not something you really want to tell a lot of people about, but I couldn't stop talking about it to other people. Like I had to over-process it. And then, like where all bad ideas come from, one day I was on GChat instead of doing my job at an office, and my friend and I like somehow came up with the idea. He was like, well, why don't you get the guy something? Like just to acknowledge that you affected his life in some way. Like get him a gift or something. And I was like, okay, that's a terrible idea, but somehow at the time we were both like, yeah, let's do that. Yeah, that's a good idea. And I think his first suggestion was to get him tickets to one of my stand-up shows. Imagine how terrible that would be. Like to be like, here, come to my show, and I'll be like, hey, remember the time I almost killed you? Nice shirt. Not what you do. But luckily we threw that one out. And then we eventually settled on the idea of getting this guy movie tickets. I don't know why. I guess it's an escapist experience. But I was like, yeah, movie tickets. And so I somehow decided to get this guy a pack of movie tickets. I don't know, let's call it grief counseling. And I got them to him, but I didn't know where he lived. So I had to go back to the police station where the incident report was filed to get his address. And when I did that, I learned a really weird thing. This guy and I, for all our differences in the world, Like his motorcycle wasn't insured, my car was. Like for all our differences, we had one thing in common. We had the exact same birthday, like same month, same day, same year. And somehow in that moment, like I was like, that's it, that's a sign. Like we're cosmically linked. Everything's gonna be okay. This guy and I have the same birthday. Like there is a God. Like I didn't go that far, but it was like close. And so I sent him the movie tickets, and of course, like he took it like anyone would, which was very well. He tried to sue me, and it was okay. My car insurance took care of it, which I really hope isn't mafia code, but they said they took care of it, and so that didn't happen anymore. But it was so weird. Like in the end, like that's all you get when something like that happens to you in life. Like there is no happy ending. There is no neat bow. Like sometimes you just have the same birthday, and then you hope, you know, it was 2008. So I hope if he used the tickets, he saw The Dark Knight instead of like Hancock or something. But at the end of the day, yeah, I might be an overly cautious driver, but sometimes that's all you get. Okay, thanks.